Okay, good afternoon, guys. Can someone please confirm whether you can hear me clearly?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, so I hope you can see my screen properly as well. So this is sixth lecture of mobile application development. So from this week onwards, you will have 9 weeks. So we don't have 10 weeks for 15 weeks. We have to complete all of this in 14 weeks, right? So you have 9 weeks to complete the part on cross-platform development, right? Before starting the lecture, I wanted to do some announcements regarding last year marks were there, right? Marks were released, and if someone is doing repeat, like your senior batch, if someone asks anything about the course, or if anyone who's doing repeat they are in this lecture right now join, you should know last year we did React Native, and this year for cross-platform development we are doing Flutter, right? So if you are redoing the paper, we are not going to give you two different papers. So you have to go through these lectures and you have to write the Flutter version, right? Not the React Native version. So if you know someone who's doing a repeat on this course, please let them know, right? That they have to go through the Flutter part because there won't be two papers, right? That's all. So I'm thinking when I'm starting that in first 5 weeks you know what mobile development is, and you have a basic idea how these ecosystems change from each other, like iOS and Android and other ecosystems. And at the same time, I think you have an understanding about the differences between mobile development and web development. For an instance, when we are developing an application for mobile development, we are actually running everything on a very tiny CPU, right? With limited battery power as well. So if we have like high computational tasks, what we have to do is we have to have a backend for that in the server side, and we have to get it done there. Like unlike in a web application, we are not going to do everything in front end. We are having some backend to do processing. Just like that, even for the mobile applications, we cannot like do most of the computations on the phone because it will drain power, and at the same time we cannot do many like network calls here and there because then again it will drain power. So we are actually trying to write applications that will efficiently work in a limited power and limited computation power environment, right? So battery versus CPU, which we are dealing with. So there is a trade-off for everything. Like even if we go for a network call, it will take some power out of the battery, but we have to we'll be talking about these things, and I am hoping so. I am not going to talk much about these things. So these things are already should be covered from the first part, right? So this lecture, right? I have 2 hours, and for 2 hours I have a really high amount of content to cover. So I'm not going to do much practicals in this lecture. I'm going to introduce you into the concepts, and you will be practically working hands-on in your practical session. So that is how we have planned this course in this year, right? Last year the practicals and everything I was trying to do everything in the lecture, which I think I don't know whether it went good or not, but I think what will be proper solution is I'm introducing the concepts, and you will have a different practical session where we fully focus on the practical aspect of the course. So today we are going to talk about 4 main points. The first is even though this course we are calling it cross-platform development, so that means we can actually develop for multiple platforms, right? So, but here we are focusing on Android, right? So even though it is cross-platform, we are focusing on Android in here, right? So Android is our platform that we have our learning materials and all, but the same thing with some change. If you have a Mac device, you can do for the Mac OS, right? So that's one. Then we'll talk, have a brief introduction onto Flutter SDK, then basic Flutter building blocks, right? And some Dart program, right? So just like I said in the introduction, I want to make it clear that we are not following right any of these things so that you can develop it for multiple platforms, right? So we are not going to do the Mac OS part, and we are not talking about how to develop into iPhone, right? In this course, not actually in this course, in the iOS course, we had some part on iOS development, but the problem was students don't have Mac devices like Apple devices. So in order to do Swift programming, you need to have a MacBook or something like that, right? So if you don't have that, you cannot actually program that. So what we have seen is we are teaching that. Even though we are teaching that, you don't, most of the student does not get to practice it well, right? Because of that, we will be focusing on the Android part or the web, right? So Android or web. So when we are talking, considering mobile application development, most of the people, including me in my undergraduate days, I was complaining more about like when I start Android Studio or any Android Studio and the emulator, I cannot do really any work, right? If I have Google Chrome, Android Studio, and the emulator running at the same time, basically I cannot run anything else, right? So it takes my whole RAM and it takes my whole computation power as well, right? So that is a problem that we have. But in this course, what you can do is in Flutter, you can actually run it on the web. Web means as a web page, right? So if you don't have the resources to run the emulator, you can try this option, right? So we are not limiting it. So you have to do all this in the emulator. Yeah, if you don't have the resources, try it on web, right? If you have the resources, try it on the emulator, right? That is how we are going to continue in this course, right? Either you can try web or you can try Android emulator. No problem. So we are okay with anything you do, right? Then the next part is if you're really like really want to try something out for the iOS, please let me or Endure know, so we can support you with the other resources that we have on iOS development. So since we are going into the Mac Android stack Android platform, you need to know what is the stack, right? Android stack, that you need to have a brief idea how on which layer applications run, right? These things, so I'm going to briefly cover because this should be already covered by GPS, right? So we are when we are taking it as layers, so in the ground layer we have a Linux kernel, right? So we have Linux kernel, then we have the hardware abstraction layer where we have an abstraction layer between the Linux kernel and the Android runtime and native libraries, right? So Linux kernel is there, Android runtime and native libraries are there. So in order to connect these two, we have a hardware abstraction layer. So actually Android runtime don't get to feel what actually hardware is. So in hardware abstraction layer, it can easily communicate with that, and this abstraction layer will communicate with the Linux kernel directly, right? On top of that, so Android runtime means the OS. On top of that, we have the Android framework, right? Android framework means all these components like activities, services, and async tasks, background threads, and everything. We have access on this layer, right? So when we are creating an app, right? If this is our app, what we are communicating is we are doing everything with this Android framework, right? So actually we are dealing with the framework, not anything inside, right? So we don't know the native libraries. Even if we want to access a native library, we are accessing it through the Android framework that is provided, right? So that's the idea. So we are actually dealing with the concepts of Android framework, right? We don't know whether in the Android native level, there is a concept called activity, right? It is just a UI, right? So, but in the framework, we have a concept called activity, we have a concept called services, we have a concept called content provider, we have a concept called broadcast receiver. Like that, we have different concepts. So all these concepts are given from this Android framework, right? On top of that, we are building that, right? So that's the idea. So it is actually the interface we are dealing with is the Android framework. So when we come to the Flutter, right? In Flutter, we have 3 levels, right? So the top level is the framework, just like we said, we have the framework on top, and then we have the engine, right? So in engine, we have all these runtimes and libraries and system events and everything we have in the engine. Then we have the embedded, right? So what is the difference between a hybrid application? So we are calling this Flutter a cross-platform application, right? And there is some other applications called hybrid applications. So we need to know what is the difference, right? So, in there, what we have to do is we consider our hybrid model, right? What we are doing is we have the Android framework, just like I said. So Android framework is here, right? So this is Android framework, and we have our application, right? This is our application. So what we are doing is on top of this Android framework, we are creating something like a browser, right? From the hybrid framework, we are creating something like a browser, right? From that browser, this app, this works as mostly as a web app, right? So we are calling the hybrid application for this browser and this web app coming together. We'll call it as the hybrid application, right? Not alone, right? So we feel like, okay, we can install that. Actually, what we are installing is a browser with some stored information, like a basic layout or something, right? How it changed from our cross-platform native model. In native model, what we are doing is we are writing for like one code base we are having, right? This code base we are compiling for different platforms. So finally, when we consider about it, actually the native code is what that is running in the code in the device itself, right? Not some web code or anything. The native code is running. So what we are doing is we are taking the code base, so it is something very similar to Java, right? So we compile it to so in here we don't compile it to some medium level which can be run by all the platforms. What we are doing is we are compiling it to different platforms so we can use it. So it is one code base, but it will support several platforms that is there, right? So why do we going for Flutter, right? So there should be a reason for us to change. So the reason is this. If we consider last 3 years, right? 2019 to 2020 and 2021. So Flutter started with 30% of the cross-platform mobile framework, and it came up to 42% of the market, right? At the same time, the React Native, which was in the top on 2019, came down to 38%. That means now users are moving towards Flutter instead of React Native, right? So that thing is there. So there is, with that trend, we have to actually learn something that would be useful, right? So you should be learning something that is useful to you, right? Otherwise, what is the point if you are learning something that is that have a downtrend, right? There won't be no value for you, right? That is why we are moving towards Flutter. So we try to update our syllabuses so you guys can actually go there and perform in your internship really well, and at the same time you'll know what is the updated information on the in the industry. So let's move on to the Flutter framework, right? So in Flutter framework, this whole Flutter framework is written on top of Dart, right? So Dart is a language. It is like a compiled language, which is much similar to JavaScript, I say. But there are many features from other languages, like inside, if you add Java into the JavaScript, right? So you will get something like that. And in Dart, the main thing is you don't have to like write your own HTML or anything, right? XML or anything. So in Android also, we don't like define the layout in the Java file. We are creating an XML, then we are using that. But in Dart, we are defining this whole layout inside the code as well, right? So we don't need to like learn XML and Dart to use it. So in Dart, it will support both the program logic and the appearance as well, right? So that is still developing. So some things you will have on the practicals, or some things I have on the slides may have been already depreciated, right? Because it is fastly changing with new concepts adding there, and they are depreciating the previous concepts, and they try to make it more efficient and user friendly as much as possible, right? And it is compiled and statically typed, and it support object oriented programming, right? Just like Java. And if you like, you can do procedural programming as well, right? Then so I know you have already tried this with Endura, but I just want to have a quick recap on these things, right? In Dart we have data types, like, so we have data types. So we have integers and doubles and booleans, and we have strings, and we have something called dynamic in here. So in dynamic, what are we mean? Dynamic, we mean, so this dynamic data can take any data type at the time, like, so for this you can sometimes assign a integer like 10. For this you can assign a boolean like this, like that. It can change the type at any time, right? Here, so it is like a universal type, right? So we have arrays and lists in there, right? So it is like basically arrays and lists are the same thing in Dart, right? So in normally when we call an array, we say, okay, array has a fixed size, right? We cannot change the size of an array, but in Dart, array means same as a list, right? So with dynamic size. So for array, but you have to give out the type for that, right? So when you are giving out the type, so if you want to add all kinds of information, you can just put dynamic type, right? Then we have the basic conditional expressions like if else, and we have looping like for and while, right? Those things are there. So I'm not going to talk about the syntax because you are in third year. We should be focusing more on the concepts rather than going through the syntax, because this syntax you can easily read the documentation and get it. Right. Then the object orientation part, right? So we have in Dart, we have the classes, right? You can create classes, and at the same time, you can have the constructors as well, right? So you can have the constructors, and there is one thing like that is like JavaScript, right? So in there we don't have the access modifier saying private or public, right? In a class, everything is public unless you say so, right? So if you want to make something private, it is just you have to put an underscore in front of the variable name, right? Sometimes you will notice even the private variables can be accessed outside a class or something like that, right? So that is because this private access modifier, it is not really a concept like strict concepts that we have in Dart. So we'll talk about those, why it work like that and the workings of that later. So for now, you should know that you can create a private variable by adding an underscore in front of the variable name. Right. So then what you can do is, even though you add something, so when you take this var, right? So it is again without giving out a type, you can create a variable like that, right? But the thing here is, when you say unlike dynamic, when you say var I, this I takes the data type of the data that is initially assigned to it, right? So you can create it like this, I. Then if you first assign 10 to this, that means now from here onwards, I's data type is integer. So that is the difference between dynamic and var, right? When you just say var, it just takes whatever the data type of that first assignment to that variable, right? So keep that in mind, right? So you can have any data for the var, but after assigning it something, so you have to add the same type of data. So otherwise it will give you errors, right? Then final and constant. So we have two variable modifiers. So you know what they mean, right? So final means variable is set once and cannot be reassigned, right? So constant means variable is set at compile time, not at runtime, right? So what is the difference? So in final, what they are doing is, if you have x like this, after you assign 10 in here, in the runtime, they will you will assign something to this x. After assigning for it one time, if this is final, you cannot modify this x. But constant means you will be assigning something to that, and in the compile time, the compiler will change the value of this x. Let's say we have a next line is you cannot add anything to x, something like this. So then what compiler will do is, compiler will replace this x with 10 inside the whole code, right? So if you are saying setting it as a constant, so it will be like the reference, or the value will be added to the, like it is like hard coded to the code itself, right? It will be running set at the compile time. So that is the difference. Then variables are null, right? Initially the value of them will be null. Then again, an important part, like this interpolation, right? So interpolation means, so in Java, we like plan to write something like this, right? First plus, then we are adding the space, then again concatenate, like that. But in Dart, you can just use some like this, like use the string, inside that with $mark, you can call the variable and put as many as spaces you want. Again, you can call the second variable, right? Like that you have to do. But in here, there is a change. The change is when you are adding something like a part of an object, right? So then you will be adding it like this now. So when you add it like this, the compiler can get like mixed ideas and there will be confusions. So for that, what we are doing is after the dollar mark, we are adding the curly brackets, and in that curly brackets inside we are putting the whole object code, right? So like this and this, right? Anyway, you can see in there you get this is really easy. So you will get the when you are trying this out, like after doing Android native or something like that, you will see how much easier is this part, like interpolation, right? Otherwise you have to keep adding with these concatenations. Like there's no end to this. Then finally we talk about multi-line strings, right? So multi-line strings means you are adding 3 invited commas, and you can add a string with uh, several lines, right? If you want to keep line breaks, like if you want to add the space in here, you can add that space and still this is the scope, right? Whatever you add it in here, it doesn't matter how many number of rows you are adding, it doesn't matter, this will be taken as the string, right? So that is for the multi-line strings. Then we have something good in here, right? For the spread operator, right? What it will do is, if you have something like this, 1, 2, 3, and 4, then for the y, you want to add something first, right? Let's see, -1, -2, -3, and now you want to add this x. Instead of adding x, what you can do is dot 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 x, and then you can add something like 11 and 12. Then what it will do is this part will be added to here, right? Like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So we are calling this spread operator, so you can use that in the Dart, right? So any list, if you want to put something in the middle, you can just do it without many problems, right? So these are some cool features in Dart language. And then just like JavaScript, functions are objects. So you can get any function. So there is actually a data type called what? A function, right? So you can get that out like this, right? Then before going into the first program, right? So private class member. So this private class member is added by this underscore, right? So that is the only way of doing that. But I think I don't know. I was hoping JavaScript will add something named private from for a long time, but they are still not changing it, right? So still we have to adhere to this underscore, right? So this is almost it. So I just quickly went through everything because this is not something you will learn by attending the lecture. This is something you should learn by trying it out, right? So you have the lecture slides. I'll upload the lecture slides today. So you can go through it, try it out for yourself, taking a, can take a Dart console, or you can inside the Flutter application, you can do that. Right. So for this course, we will be using VS Code as the IDE. Reason, because these days I cannot ask you to go buy an SSD to run Android Studio, right? So that's the main reason. So otherwise, I would like to do this on the Android Studio, so you can get the native app development experience well. But VS Code supports everything, and everything is there. I think last Tuesday you had some idea about it. So today I'll just show you the Android Studio, right? For only for this lecture, right? From next week onwards, we'll be doing everything on VS Code, right? So for this lecture, I'm just using Android Studio for you to show like how things happen and how it actually works inside Android Studio, right? Because from today onwards, we will be going with Visual Studio Code, right? So this is the Hello World app. So we have what? We have a void main function. So inside the void main function, so in the Flutter app, we need to give an app, and everything in Flutter is a widget. That can be part of UI, that can be part of some property, like even a property is a UI widget in Flutter, right? So we have string widgets, number widgets, like that. Everything in Flutter is a widget, right? So what you will have to do is, in order to run the Flutter app, in the Dart file in the main, you have to call run app, and in here you have to give a widget, right? So that's all, right? You don't have to make it like this, right? Let's go back and let's try to create this small version, but let me show you something. Right. So how to create a Flutter application, that is in here, right? Go to new, in Android Studio, new Flutter project, right? And you have to give the SDK path, and then you have to give project name and the Android language and iOS language, and you can either give the platforms you need to get the support into, right? And you can give the organization and set the package name and everything. Then you can finish. So when you just finish an Android app, you will get something like this. And let's try to run this. So I didn't run this earlier, so you can see for the first run, Flutter takes some time, right? So even that time is not long, or that time is even shorter than the native Android running time, right? But after that, in Flutter, we have something called hot reload, right, which we can use Sometimes if you do really, we have hot reload and we have something called hot restart, right? So we don't have to like rebuild the application again. We just can just check the changes we have done, right? So until this is getting built, let's move on to the hot reload. So this is a feature you have with Flutter where you don't have to like recompile the whole thing, and you can just push the changes you did. Right. So the foundation of Flutter, right? So it is, Flutter is built around the concept or the process called as componentization, right? That means like dividing everything into different components until like we get an atom, right? Like that, we are going to divide the same thing into different parts, right? So the two parts we have in every app. So these components in Flutter, we are calling them as widgets. Right? Just like I said, everything in Flutter is a widget, right? Then we have presentation, what we can see, and we have the behavior, the logic, right? So everything we will be writing inside a widget. Then UI as code, that we already know, right? So in Flutter, we are using the same Dart code to create the UI and to create the logic as well, right? So which is really helpful. So you don't have to like go to two files in order to like work on the UI and work on the logic, right? So in one file you can do both, right? In the main function is the basic Dart main function, and extend means the same. Java extend means class again means the same thing, right? So let's check on this. Okay, still it is running. So I have Zoom and everything running on that. That may be a reason. Yeah, let's see. Okay. So this is the Flutter Demo app. So when we click on this button, right, we get the number increase. Right. This is actually stuck. Anyway, so that's the idea, right? So what we want to do is, so this is the Flutter homepage and all. So you can see here several things I wanted to show, right? So in the main, so you can see this main file is running as just Java or any other function. You can actually do the same thing, same void main functionality like this. And just like running a function, right? So which means you can change this thing into this, right? And some good features you will get in here, right? So you can reformat with Dart format, right? So you will get, other than just reformat from the intelligent brains, you can use Dart format to format your Flutter file. So you can see there is a my app. So that is the widget we are running in here, right? It shouldn't be always a widget, right? Shouldn't be it shouldn't be always a class. So you can actually run something like so this whole thing you don't have to do that in there. So what you can do is for an instance, let me delete this whole part. Right. So we can have something like material app directly on here, right? So now we can run this, like it will be hot restarted. So we don't have anything. You can see it is just this, right? Inside this material app, what we are going to have is our own scaffold, right? So normally what we are doing is let's try to reformat this. So we are keeping it like this. And inside this, we can have what? Right. So they have created this as my app extends stateless widget. So inside that, we are building the material app. Inside that material app, we are giving the title, and inside the home, we are calling something called scaffold. So scaffold is something like the basic layout for a mobile application, right? Where we can add some app bar and where we can have some body, right? In this material app, you have several other features like how to remove the debug banner and many other things, right? So let's try them out first. Right, in the material app, first let's add the title. So this is what? The hello world. Right. So save this and restart. Can we see any difference? Nothing, right? So nothing is there. So that is the application title. Then we are going to add the home. Right. Then for home, we are adding a new scaffold there. Right. So for scaffold, we can add the app bar. Right. In the app bar, we can add a title. Title should be again a widget. So we cannot add something directly there. So we have to add the text widget, and inside that we have to say hello world. Now we can restart and we can see this app. Right. So this is the hello world and basic structure of the Flutter app. So if you want to do something like remove this debug banner, there's again a feature for that. debug show checked mode banner. So we can just set it to false. Right. So when we restart the app, so you can see the banner is gone. So the best thing about this is even for these little levels of UI, if you want to do that in an Android native application, you know how much building time it will take, right? But in here, we can just do the change and we can see it on the emulator, right? So after this app bar, if you like, so this is the app bar, this is the scaffold. After that bar, we can add something like again, we can take the body property. Inside the body property, we can add the again a text. Yeah, again a text. Then inside that, I can again add something like this, right? Then we run this, we can see some text should be there. So let's make it so I'm gonna wrap it with center, right? Then let's see the change. Right, so we'll get it to the center, right? So this is the hello world, what we are doing on Flutter. So from here onwards, all the other things you will be doing in Visual Studio Code, and it will work like that, right? So in here you can see, even though we can do it in the main function, we can keep on building the thing, right? So you can add more widgets to this, and you can just do it on this function itself without adding anything other than this, right? So that is one part. So for a very simple application, you can work on it like this, right? If not, you can just divide it into different classes, right? So those classes should be either a stateless widget or a stateful widget. So we'll talk about these widgets in the next lecture, right? So for now, let's go back to our slides. Right. So all these widgets, so just like I said, we have two main types of widgets. The one is stateless. The second one is stateful. So meaning of this is stateless widgets are just take, you can just use them with constant because they are not going to change, right? Stateful widgets, they are going to change, like the dynamic widgets. Like if it is a text field or any checkbox or anything where user can interact and change it, then it is a stateful widget. Stateless widgets are like the labels you have and all these things. They are stateless widgets, right? So all these widgets, right? There are more than 170 widgets right now, right? So these widgets, we can actually divide it into 4 groups. The one is a value widgets, right? So value widgets means any widget that hold a value, maybe an image, maybe a text, or any selection, right? So those widgets, so inside that we are it will actually hold a value. Then we have layout widgets. So layout widgets are like this center, row, column, align, padding, right? Any widgets that we are using to like to do the layout in Flutter. Then we have navigation, right? So navigation part we will do later. So in Android we are calling activities now. So we are moving from one activity to another using an intent, right? But in here, even in React Native and Flutter, we are calling this one of one UI, a screen. So screen, we are moving from one screen to another, and for that we have to use navigation. So in navigation, there are different ways of navigating, like a tab navigation, push navigation, like that, right? So all these navigating things like dialogues and navigation bars, tab bars, everything comes under navigation. Then we have other category. In there we have all these other features where we have different transitions, where we have gestures to do different things like multi-finger gestures, like that. We can code different things, right? If you use 4 fingers, what will happen, like that. We can code different things. So all these things comes under the other. So you can visit to this link and you can find out about the widgets, right? So we are calling about built-in widgets, okay, not widgets we create. So the next part is, so just like we created, we can create our own widgets, right? You can give it a name, right? For an instance, let's say I want to create a card like this. In this card, in here, I want to have an image, right? Someone's image. Then I want to have a title in here. Then here I want to have some badges, right? So this is the card, right? This card itself, I can give it a name, right? Something like what? Profile card. So what you can do is, with existing features, you can create this. This can be a stateless widget or stateful widget, and you can give it a name. And actually, you can use it, like reuse it. So there are built-in widgets, and there will be widgets that we are creating for our purposes, right? So every widget is a class, so it can have properties and methods, right? So every widget can have a constructor, right, with 0 or more parameters, right? So in a widget, you can see there is a build method, right? In build method, so if it is a widget, there is a build method that you will have to override, right? In that build method, we are writing the UI part. So you can have your own other methods inside the widget to support the logics, right? Support the business logic inside there. So that's the idea, right? So with all these things, so what we will have to do is, when we are structuring an application in Flutter, the main thing we will have to do is we have to first find out what are the screens that we are having, right? So finding out what are the screens, that plays a huge role in Flutter, right? So it is like finding out what are the different activities in Android native, right? Then you have to find out, okay, what are the UI components that I'll be customized that will be reused. So those UI components, then you have to create, right? So after that, it is just like just Java programming. You can go with object orientation, right? Or if you like, you can use the structured programming. Anything will be okay, but you have to keep that in mind. So when you're changing to Flutter, the main confusion people have is everything in Flutter, everything is one file. So we have the UI in there, we have the logic in there. So people get confused with the logic and UI because the code can get really messy. So you can see when we are keep adding different widgets and widgets and widgets, so it starts getting kind of we get to confuse, right? So even in this one, you can see even though there are what I did is, so we have a material app, right? On top we have the material app, right? Then inside that one we have the title, then we have the home. For the home we have scaffold bar, scaffold, right? Then in the scaffold we have app bar, and then we have the body, right? This app bar have again a title. For that title we are having a text widget. In that text widget we are having again this string. Here for this title also we are setting this, right? String property, right? String value we are setting. So it is not like for title we are setting the setting a string. For this text widget we are passing this string as a value, right? Then for the app bar we are just using title for now, but I'll show you there are many things we can add to app bar. Then for the body we are just adding a text, right? So this is what we have in here, right? But you can see it can get really messy to understand what is the widget tree looks like, right? So with there we'll be talking about the widget tree, because in here, unlike React Native, we don't have virtual DOM or anything like that. So instead of that, what we have is a widget tree, right? So developing in Flutter. There are a few things you need to know. The basic thing is Flutter SDK. I'm sure that you have already installed the Flutter SDK, right? So that should be there. And you should have an IDE, which is VS Code for this course, and there are IDE dev tools and an emulator, right? So dev tools, you have the extension, Flutter and Dart extensions, and then we have an emulator, right? Then inside the Flutter SDK, we have the compiler, project creator, device manager, and all these things, right? For the IDE, we have pretty much everything, right? So dev tools as well. Emulator is a virtual device to run your mobile app. Then when we talk about the anatomy, right? In a Flutter project, so let's go back to our project pane. Right? In there you can see, right? For now we have only Android in here, right? Android and iOS in here. So we have for Mac OS, Linux, and all these things, right? And for web, we have in here, right? So these files are there, folders are there for different platforms, right? So that is one of the folders. Then we have the lib folder, which says it is the library. So inside this, we have the main.dart file, right? So all the source files in our project, we are adding it to the lib folder, right? So keep that in mind. Then we have a test folder. So all the unit tests and other things will be adding there, right? So yeah, we'll try to write some tests. So otherwise, it is just we are teaching you how to just start coding. So when you are going into the industry, you don't have any idea how to write a unit test, right? So let's do that part in this course. Then for the files, we have the pub spec and JIT-know and readml you already know. Then metadata and dot packages for dependency management, right? So in this pub spec, we have the like configuration for the project. We are adding the dependencies and most of the things. Like so, just like a POM in Maven or package.json in Node, right? So npm, right? So just like that. So in here we will be just calling like pub install, things like that, right? Then IDE toolbars, you will have your project pane, editor pane, then the art analysis, Flutter outline, Flutter inspector, debug console, right? So I'll show them in Visual Code, Visual Studio Code in next day. So for today, so Flutter outline is this one. Flutter, we'll have to wait for. And then we have Flutter performance and device manager that is in there. And here we have the most important thing, we have our Flutter analysis, right? Then we are seeing something, the name my app is in the class, right? So it is in the test, right? Not in our one. It is in the Dart test. So they have added something. So this my app is not there, that thing is there. Then prefer constant with constant constructors, like we are getting that in here, right? So you can see this test can be constant, right? So instead of like keeping it as a dynamic object, we can put the constant here. So that is why they are giving that error. So same applies for here, because when you add this keyword, like it will be really easy for the not the compiler, but when we are running the app, we don't have to like keep these things in the RAM, right? For someone to access, right? You can just set the value, right? Instead of keeping a reference, right? So that thing is there. Then we can say, okay, this whole center thing, we can say that is a constant. Then finally, you can say for the scaffold, that is not scaffold. Yeah, we have unused import. No, we are using this this material that we are using for this material, right? So those things are there. So these things I wanted to show you, like in this Flutter outline, you can see the widget tree, right? This is the tree. So you have the material app, then you have the scaffold. Inside that you have the bar, and then you have this. So there are and then Flutter Inspector. So I cannot really see that, I think, because of the RAM issue, right? So in here you can see this same screen, right? By click on that, you can get some idea like what is there and what is the device that you have in there, like that, right? Okay, we cannot see that. Anyway, so these are the things. So you won't be using these things in the Android Studio. You will be using them in VS Code. In VS Code, we have the same things. Then is structuring the applications, right? So we did one part already. So the one thing is the app bar. So this is the most important part. In a app bar, what we did was we only set the title. But in app bar, we have several properties, right? So we have the title, we have something called leading, where we can add the button or icon to that. Then we have some actions in here, right? So we can put that, and we have a bottom, and we have some flexible space in there in the app bar, right? What you can do is, so you can go to app bar in Flutter docs, and you can find out what are the properties available, right? So always try to, if you don't know anything, just go to that Flutter docs, and then you can just get the idea, okay, what are the things I can do with this widget. So you can get the idea there. So this is again the important thing, that is in Flutter, we don't have the document object model. We don't have something called doc, right? So what we have in here is actually these three things, right? So one is initially we have something called widget tree, right? It is the initial version. So it is something like this, right? Then when rendering, this will be changed into the element tree, transferred into a element tree. Finally, it will be rendered, rendering tree. Right? So actually in the middle level, the virtual DOM is something like the element tree, right? But we are talking about the widget tree. That is what we can see like this. And we have a container, then in that container for some property, we are setting something else and we do all that, right? Then the material design, right? So when you are saying, okay, material app in Flutter, so that is how we started, right, in our version. So when we are saying, okay, material app, actually what we are saying is we are going to develop a material app. So main parts of the material app will be there in the scaffold. That is why we are going with the scaffold for the home, right? So that's the like initial things I wanted to show. Then let's try to don't have browsing there. What do we have in Flutter? Right? So you can see there are several things you can do, right? So this is Flutter, right? So this is not something I can teach you in 9 weeks. And I'm just giving you the main concepts, and from there you have to learn it by yourself, right? So what you can do is, I think you have already started on the project, right? I'll make sure that I'm publishing the mini project. I'll try my best to publish it next week. So you have 8 weeks to complete it, right? So in this course, you will only have get one assessment. That is a mini project that you will have to do in Flutter, right? So let's I'll be uploading that next week. Then you have something in here named cookbook, right? So in here, that is really easy for you to follow, right? They are giving like animator page transition, like that. They are giving out all the steps that you have to do, right? So by doing that, if you can do all these things, like in order to complete one, it won't take more than 30 minutes, right? Try to complete these things, then you will get a really good idea, okay, how to write a unit test and how to call an API, right? Everything is there which you can use. The other part, even for myself, right? So right now you're in your 3rd year, so you know that it is really, for some languages we know the syntax, right? So if you're only using Java for a while, you know Java, right? So you don't need to like go there and search for any APIs documents for to get its syntax. But if you are working on Java, Flutter, and Python, R, and everything for a while, right? Sometimes you don't know, okay, in order to get the size of an array in this language, what should I use? Whether it is size function or whether it is size property, or whether it is length, right? We tend to forget, but we know it should be either size or length, right? So that's the idea, right? If you are like after this lecture, if you are asking me about Flutter syntax, yeah, maybe some I'll get confused, because really I don't keep them in the memory, right? If I need something, most of the time as engineers, what we do is we are reusing our own codes, right? So we write something, we are actually putting effort onto writing the business logic, right? That's why I am saying, like, always try to go for the official documentation when you are doing something. If you don't know how to do something before going into a blog, try to go see in the official documentation, are they giving you some method to do it? So otherwise what you will do is you will try some method that is already depreciated in the community, right? So some Indian guy's video, you just watch it and you are trying to do that same thing in your app, but now the new Flutter version won't even support it, right? So that problem is there. So always try to access the official documentation. In this widgets catalog, you can see all these different uh, things in there. So if you want to search for one, so let me search for app bar. Right. So I want to get the app bar class. Yeah, it is not here. No, let's go back to the widget. Yeah. So inside this goes to the basics. So in there we can see the app bar. Right. So always try to get the class, right? So not something someone wrote. Right, in there you can see in the app bar we have all this information, and at the same time you can see the properties, right? The things you can set actions, and you can set the action icon theme, right? Like that, you can see all the properties in the app bar, and the value you can set to that. For an instance, let's go to the title. They are saying any widget, right? For the title you can go for any widget, but let's go to text widget and we can get the idea. Right, so when we get this test class, if we go to properties, then you can see for its data you have to give out a string, right? So like that you can see what are the data that is supported for each of the properties, right? So all the classes are there. So try to search API docs always. So all the classes are there. So anything you want, you can just go there and find in the methods, or you can find it in the properties, right? So which things you can set, or any methods you can use. So that's the idea. So I hope you'll start working on a test app this week, so you can get some ideas. So the most recommended thing is go there and try this cookbook, right? In that cookbook, you'll learn many things, right? So to finally wind up the session, right? In this lecture, so I went too fast in the beginning, actually thinking that in 2 hours I wouldn't be able to cover this all, right? But still there are, I have some time. Anyway, so in this one, we actually covered the not the Visual Studio Code, but Android Studio and the Flutter Dart anatomy and Dart programming and all of this. And at the same time, if you want to get started, like go there and access these links, so you can learn something. So base part of changing the course and doing it in this way, like adding a practical session, is to give you the correct understanding. So otherwise you will be doing this course as a mobile application development, and the end of the session you can't even push some app into a Play Store, right? So I don't like that idea. So let's try to create some applications, and some of the applications you can actually push it to Play Store and see how it performs, right? So that's the final idea by following this course, right? So that's all from me. So if you have any questions, now it's the time. Okay, seems like not. Yeah, so first week I didn't expect much questions as well, but from next week onwards, let's try to make it interactive as possible, because I'll be doing some activities as well, because next week we'll be starting with the widgets and different methods of handling them. So you should have some questions after next week's session. Yeah, then with that, I'm going to wind up the session. See you guys on next Wednesday.